Thank you, Kat and our band. That was a perfect song for today. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. As we've already talked about, today is the day when we experience and talk about love through the context of the Christmas story. There's a wonderful quote that I love by Eric Siverd, who says, "Christmas is a necessity. There has to be at least one day of the year to remind us that we are here for something else besides our ordinary selves." You know, so often we consider ourselves just what we may call an ordinary selves, but we truly are extraordinary beings, that there's more than meets the eye. Quite often the image that comes to me, the first time it came to me was at a time of prayer and meditation, but is of Russian nesting dolls. You know what they are, where there's in a set where you have the large doll and then a smaller and a smaller and smaller. And I saw myself like that in a time of meditation. And how many times do we feel like that the little mini me, that you're out facing the world and you just feel like this little ordinary you. And yet you're also every expression. You're that largest one, that the mightiest me, all that is. We truly are an expression of all that is. And so realizing that our opportunity in life is to bring our extraordinary self, our spiritual self, these divine attributes and qualities into our everyday ordinary life. And then the two become as one. It's as if there is no ordinary and extraordinary. It's just you. And it's a beautiful thing. When you think about love, have you ever noticed that love makes everything easier? That if you love to do something, it's easy. I mean, there are people that love to do things like rappel off cliffs. Now, to me, that would be torture. But if you love to do something, it juices you. It gives you something. I love to garden. I love to work with plants and herbs and vegetable gardens and stuff. And so if you put me outside in the summertime or in the spring and I'm working with my plants in the garden, I literally can work 4, 5, 6 hours all day on a Saturday. And I'm squatting up and down, I'm lifting, I'm pulling, I'm digging, I'm crawling around. And I don't even think about it until I get up the next day and I may be sore, but because I loved it. But if you took away what I loved and you said, "Darlene, go outside next Saturday and for 4 hours squat and bend and lift," it would be torture because you took away what I love. And it's as if love, when we love something, it gives us the capacity to do more than we may ordinarily be able to do. You know it's true when you love someone. How many of you are parents? Now, if a stranger did some of the things your children have done to you, would you be in prison right now? That when you love someone, how many of you have ever been in a relationship with a spouse or a partner? That when you love someone, you're able to withstand and to show up in greater ways than you ordinarily may not be able to do. I remember a number of years ago seeing a story about I think she was a great-grandmother in her 70s, and the little grandchild, the car had rolled on the child's leg, and this woman literally lifted it up to get the child out from under it. We've all probably heard stories and know that those things like that can happen, and I believe it is because it's as if the power of love is so big that we forget who we are, and we literally become a pure expression of that love. Perhaps that's what the Christmas story is about. It's about not necessarily forgetting who we are, but remembering who we are. It's that pure conscious channel of love and of light, and allowing that to do things through us and to allow us to birth and bring forth things that we may have heretofore thought were impossible. And so today when we look at the Christmas story, we do so through the eyes of Mary. Last week we looked at the Christmas story through the eyes of Joseph. As I mentioned last week, when the Christmas story is read, it's really the blending of two. There's the Gospel of Matthew tells the story from Luke's perspective. Then there's the Gospel of Luke, which tells the story from Mary's perspective. The Gospels were written 800 to 1,000 years apart. But what we typically do is just merge the two together, and then if we're really good, we add Santa and elves and all these things, and it turns into just a great story. In Unity, we also focus and differentiate point out the differences between Jesus and Christ. Jesus was the Christ. Jesus was an individual who demonstrated his Christ potential. That the Christ, the word Christ is a Latin term or Greek term, it comes from Christos. It means anointed one. People in that time knew that he was Jesus the Christ. He was recognized as the anointed one anointed from the Father, from the Creator. And what the word in unity, when we talk about Christ, then we're talking about what Jesus talked about, that all of us have the capacity to demonstrate God, that we all are incarnating the presence of God, the presence of life. He perhaps embodied it and demonstrated it better than I do, maybe better than you do, but that's what we're born to do, is each of us are here to realize and actualize the same potential. And that's not just unity, that's found in the New Testament. Would you give me the scripture? In Colossians, found in the first chapter, it says, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. To me, that's one of the best definitions of Christ, that it's our invisible spirit that animates all that we are, which is an expression of God. And it says this message was kept secret for centuries and generations past, but now it has been revealed to God's people. For God wanted them to know that the riches and glory of Christ are for you Gentiles too. You see, it used to be thought it was only for the Jewish people. What they're saying is, no, it's for everybody. There's no one considered unclean, that everyone is an expression of Christ. And this is the secret. Christ lives in you. And this gives you the assurance of sharing in this glory. In Unity, the co-founder Charles Fillmore said each of us has within him the Christ, or her the Christ, just as Jesus had. And we must look within to recognize and actualize our sonship, which is our divine origin and birth, even as Jesus did. I really like the way the mystic Meister Eckhart said it. He said, what is the good if Mary gave birth to the Son of God 2,000 years ago if I do not give birth to God today? And what good is it to me if this eternal birth of the divine Son takes place unceasingly, but does not take place within myself? And what good is it to me if Mary is full of grace if I am not also full of grace? We are all mothers of God, for God is always needing to be born. You see, in this context, to say that we're mothers of God is to birth something, is to bring something to life, and that each and every one of us are bringing forth something that is beyond our human imagination, that you're here to be the birthplace of your divine attributes, your divine potential. So we're going to look at the story today, picking it up from the Gospel of Luke. During Elizabeth's 6 months of pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin. She was engaged to marry a man named Joseph from the family of David. Her name was Mary. The angel came to her and said, "Greetings. The Lord has found favor in you. The Lord has blessed you and is with you." But Mary was very startled by what the angel said and wondered what this greeting might mean. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary." Now, if you remember last week when the angel spoke to Joseph, the angel said, "Do not be afraid." That's a common theme that we see throughout the story. "Do not be afraid, Mary, for God has shown you his grace. Listen, you will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of King David, his ancestor, and he will rule over the people of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will never end." Mary said to the angel, "How will this happen since I am a virgin?" The angel said to Mary, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will cover you. For this reason, the baby will be holy and will be called the Son of God. Now Elizabeth, your relative, is also pregnant with a son, though she is very old. Everyone thought she could not have a baby, but she is also pregnant and has been pregnant for 6 months. God can do anything." Mary then said, "I am the servant of the Lord. As you have said unto me, so let it be." And then the angel departed. Now, when we look at this story, we look at it on two levels. We look at it on the historical level to see what value we can glean here, and we also look at it on the metaphysical, beyond the physical, or the symbolic level, to see how it applies. That if you really understand the Bible, it's a book, a story about our unfoldment from Adam consciousness, believing you're separated, to Christ consciousness, to knowing you're at one with God. And the characters and the places in the Bible are all helping us understand aspects of our own spiritual capacity and our soul's unfoldment. So Mary, a virgin is simply one who is complete unto thyself. Because in order to bring forth the Christ, in order to bring forth your higher self, you must know yourself as whole and complete. That your worthiness, that all that you are in God is not self-generated, it's source-originated. That's what it means to be a virgin in spirit, is to be complete unto thyself. Some of the historical things about Mary in this particular culture would have been a young teenage girl, probably between 12 and 14 years old. That's typically when girls were married in this tradition. The scriptures say that she's from Nazareth. Nazareth was considered a very ordinary town. It was known as a peasant village. It says all the inhabitants were looked upon with contempt by the other people of Judea, by the other Jews, because they spoke a ruder dialect, were less civilized, and were more were more exposed by their position to contact with the heathens, with the outside worlds. So they were looked down upon a little bit because of their geographic location, and they interacted with the Gentiles or the unclean people. They were also less sophisticated, less educated. That's where Mary came from, the peasant village. And she was not considered special. Women in that particular time, when a census was taken, only the men were counted. The women and the children weren't counted. Women and children were considered property. It just was the way the culture was at the time. So a marriage engagement was actually an agreement between two families. It was a financial agreement between the two families. A lot of people would have been invested in this. And essentially, the bride's family or the groom's family would be giving usually animals or certain things in exchange for the bride. That's where the term comes from, who gives this hand in exchange of marriage. It dates all the way back to that concept. So Mary, as this young girl, did not have a plan for her life. Her life had already been set into motion by her culture, her tradition, and her family had made this marriage arrangement. So when an angel comes to her and says, "Greetings, favored one. The Lord has blessed you and is with you." Now you can begin to realize why she was shocked. She's like, "Me? The Lord has blessed me and is with me? Who am I? I'm a nobody. The Lord has blessed me and is with me." Would you say that with me? The Lord has blessed me and is with me. Say that again, if you will. The Lord has blessed me and is with me. To really let that settle in, to realize that you have been called, that each and every one of us, that's your message, that the creative presence has blessed you by your very incarnation and is with you. And so the first thing Mary teaches us is Mary has to be open to this, has to realize that there's a blessing here for me. You know, often in life, we get caught up in going through things, and it's hard to realize, how could there be a blessing here for me? This week I found myself in a situation where I got angry. And anytime I get angry, I know that I need to go apart, be by myself, and figure out what is going on, what has disturbed me inside. And in doing that, typically, well, always what I find is if I've gotten angry or whenever I feel like I'm off center, it's an opportunity for me to return to love. Because when we get angry, who do we need to love first and foremost? It's ourselves. To realize that no matter what happens, there's a blessing here for me if I can open to that. And so the Mary part of your being knows there's always a blessing here for you. I think children are the best teachers. My niece, who is now in college, when she was 4 years old, we tell this story every year at our family when we get together for Christmas, but Mallory, my niece, when she was 4, she and her older brother, who was 8, went to see Santa Claus at the mall. It was a couple of days before Christmas, and they finally had time to wait in that line and go see Santa. So my 4-year-old niece jumps up on Santa's lap, and Santa asks that question, "So what do you want for Christmas?" And she looks a few minutes and she says, "I want some wooden blocks with letters on them." My sister's puzzled. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And then she says, "I want a red fire truck." Now my sister's really puzzled. She's never asked for a red fire truck. And then she goes on to say, "I want a little doll in like a blue dress." Now my sister is going into panic mode. She hasn't heard any of these things. Where is this coming from? She rattles off a few more things that is totally foreign. My nephew is laughing the whole time. So when Mallory finishes, she hops off of Santa's lap and she comes back, and my sister kneels down and says, "Honey, that was good. Why did you tell Santa you wanted those things?" And about that time, my nephew pointed, and right up above Santa's head was a shelf. And on that shelf was some wooden blocks with ABCs on them, a red fire truck, a little doll with a blue dress, and the other things. And my sister said, "Honey, why did you tell Santa you wanted those things?" And she said, "Mom, Santa didn't have very much to choose from this year. But I named everything he had. I'm sure I'll like something." And I love that because the innocence of a child, she knew there's a blessing in here somewhere for me. And for us, the Mary part of us always knows that no matter what you see, there's a blessing in here somewhere for you. The second thing that Mary teaches us when it comes to opening to love and being able to express the greater presence, this Christ presence through us, is that our yes is needed. My yes is needed. Mary's yes was needed. Now, not everyone, the first time they hear you are a divine being, not everyone believes that. How many of you had a little trouble believing you were a divine being? How many of you had more trouble believing you were a sinner? Because you were good at that. That we were told those things, and they somehow seem to fit us a little bit better. So when you hear that, no, you're made in the likeness and image of God. There is nothing you can do that can change who you are. There's nothing that can take away your worthiness. There's nothing that can separate you from your divine inheritance, except you can think yourself differently. You can think yourself unworthy. You can think and show up in another way. And so our yes, in realizing that and really sort of marinating ourselves daily in our times of prayer and meditation to really focus on, I say yes. I am. The light and love of God is my true nature, and I allow that to be. And so Mary is the part of us that is there to receive the blessing. Mary is the part of us that says, yes, I know this is true. I allow this to be true. I claim it. I live this truth. And then after you say yes, the next thing that has to happen, especially in a pregnancy when we're giving birth to something, bringing something to life, is we must nurture it. Our nurturance is needed. You know, when you nurture anything, you protect it. You tend to it. You give it your life. You're nurturing it. And so it is with us to be willing to nurture this idea within us. And one of the greatest ways for me to nurture my divinity is to recognize and nurture your divinity. As we begin to know, even if a person may act otherwise, I still know that divine spark is there, and to realize it is there, to really nurture it. Several years ago, I used to work for a children's toy company, and every February there's the International Toy Fair, which takes place in New York City. And so it was my job to get ready for that International Toy Fair, which meant I got to spend a lot of time in New York City. So much so that I learned my way around, and I would walk to different restaurants. And one night I was there working with a friend and I had been working, and we were excited because we had Broadway tickets. And so we had our dinner, and we left, and we went to cross over a couple of blocks to go to see a Broadway show. Well, when we headed out, the first street we needed to cross, there were barricades, a line of people, and some police officers completely blocked off. So we need to get to the show, and I come up to this and walk over to the police officer, and I said, sir, we've got to go over here. Can we cross through, or can you tell me how to go around? He said, nobody's going anywhere right now. And I said, what's wrong? He said, haven't you heard? And about that time, I saw this little wagon thing coming it was the Pope mobile. It was Pope John Paul. He said, the Pope is coming. I couldn't, I'm not Catholic, wasn't Catholic. That didn't have the same meaning to me that it did a lot of people. But before I could even think about it, here comes this little bubble with the Pope doing like this. It's going real slow. And I'm standing, he literally goes right in front of me. Beside me was an older woman with her husband. When the Pope went by, she literally fell out. People were falling down and crying and screaming, and I'm thinking, wow, I just wanted to cross the street. But it really struck me about, for me it may be something else, but for some people he represented the key to their divinity, and it was helping them nurture something. Well, since then I've always paid a little more attention to the Pope, and that particular Pope didn't catch my attention so much, but the new Pope has. Pope Francis is a rock star in my book. And he is really a bit of a rock star. People around the world are loving Pope Francis. As a matter of fact, there was a column in the Washington Post, and the headline said, if you like Pope Francis, you're going to love Jesus. Because he's known as the love Pope. What he's talking about is what Jesus and other master teachers have always said, but somehow we're ready to hear it now. Maybe the audience is greater, and he's transcending lines, and he's doing something unique in that he's putting himself in the back seat, and he's really encouraging people, go direct. You have this divinity within. We are the ones that need to love. Some of the things he has recently said, he said, we think it's a worse tragedy when investment banks fail than when people starve to death. We've become so used to the suffering of others, we are a society that has forgotten how to weep and how to experience compassion. He said, a way has to be found to enable everyone to benefit from the fruits of the earth, and not to simply close the gap between the affluent and those who must be satisfied with the crumbs falling from the table, but above all, to satisfy the demands for justice, fairness, and respect for every human being. He's suggesting that we get back to the basics of nurturing love in one another and nurturing love within ourselves. He said, seeking happiness in material things is a sure way to remain unhappy. Sometimes we're tempted to find excuses and complain, acting as if we could only be happy if 1,000 conditions were met. He said, I say that the most beautiful expressions of happiness and joy and love that I've seen in my life were from some of the poorest people in some of the poorest conditions, who had little to hold on to, but still knew they had much to give. Isn't that beautiful? When we nurture that love within us, we know we have much to give, no matter what. And so he's talking about that it's our job is to grow in love. That's what Mary is about, teaching us to grow in love. The article went on to say, why do people love Pope Francis? It said, because he has thrown open his arms wide to all of us, without caveat or exception, and extended the unflinching, unfailing love of God. That's what our world is hungry for right now. You see, Pope Francis did not become a pope until he was 33 years old. He worked and lived as a regular, ordinary person before becoming a pope. As a matter of fact, he worked for a while as a chemical technician, but the reason I love him is because before that, he was a nightclub bouncer. You gotta love a pope who used to be a nightclub bouncer. That just can reconcile that together. And he's less ornate in the things that he does. He doesn't ride in the big limousine. He rides in a little economy car. He doesn't wear the very expensive leather shoes. He wears work boots. He does things because that's who he is. It's not that there's anything wrong with those other things. It's just who he is. And he's really helping people realize that we're here to nurture this love. And that's what we're called to do. Each and every one of us is to nurture the love. And as I said earlier, the place that we most need to nurture love is within ourselves. because you surely can't give from a cup that's empty. A Course in Miracles, which is a powerful body of work, really talks about the power of love versus the power of fear. And if you distill the teaching down to its essence, what it's teaching is all of us at all times are either crying for love or we are a spark of love. How many times do we find ourselves crying for love? If you ever think about it, when you're frustrated, no matter what's happening in your life, you're usually crying for love, crying for compassion, crying for understanding. Well, it's in those places, as we can open and love ourselves the best way we know how, with the tools that we have at the time, then we begin to be a spark of love, expressing it here and now. And that's what Mary teaches. Mary says that there's a blessing here for me. God is here to bless me. And so I say yes. And then the second one is I commit to nurture that. And the third and the final point is it's not just enough to nurture it. Mary needed to deliver that baby. But you see, with us, it's not a one-time delivery. It's a minute-by-minute, choice-by-choice, everyday delivery. That delivering love that Mary in the scriptures went on to sing and say, "My soul doth magnify the Lord." Well, it's as if our soul sings. It says, my soul is here to magnify my divine attributes. That's what I'm here to do, that we're here to deliver it every day. Richard, would you give me that song? Several years ago, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Maria Nemeth. I don't know if any of you know her. She's a pretty esteemed psychologist. She's a writer. She does a lot of coaching, and she offered a program for ministers to go through spiritual coaching. And so I went through that with her. She's out in California, and she was just a joy to work with. And she shared a story with us one day when she was talking to us about being ready. She said that sort of at one of the high points in her career, she had just published a new book. She had been invited to Hilton Head, South Carolina, to speak before a lot of her colleagues and esteemed psychologists. And so she was speaking at a behavioral psychologist conference in Hilton Head, South Carolina. So she flew from California to South Carolina. She said a couple of hours before she was scheduled to speak, she made a quick visit downstairs to make a copy of a paper that she needed. And she said she had still had bedhead. She had been to work out, and she had on a kind of a flimsy sweatsuit. She told us her hair literally looked like Einstein hair, no makeup. And just as she's got the copy and she's getting ready to step back on the elevator, someone said, Dr. Nemeth, you're 15 minutes late. The people are getting restless. You must come deliver your presentation now. And she said, you've got to be kidding. Well, she said that was before cell phones, and she realized she had forgotten to change her time. She was still 3 hours behind. And so in that moment, when she wanted to say, no, I'm not ready, and run back upstairs, she looked down at her paper. The title of her presentation was, How to Help People When They Are in the Middle of a Breakdown. Dr. Nemeth said, I brushed my hair, I straightened my sweatsuit, and I went out and I spoke. And she said it was the most powerful experience I've ever had because it was the most humbling. And she said, what I was really needing to talk to people about is you can't wait until you think you're ready. And she told the group of us ministers who were sitting there, she said, you're never going to be ready. You're never going to be complete. But you got to deliver this every day. You got to show up as best you can. Because there's certainly going to be times that you're called on to do things, and you're going to feel like, oh, I'm not ready. But what I want you to know is the Spirit in you is always ready. It's waiting for you to step out and to give it an opportunity so it can grow you into your readiness. You see, the birth process is about who we become in the process. And our world needs each and every one of us to stand firm and say, I am ready. I'm ready to share what I've got right now. I'm ready to give what I can give right now, and I'm still learning. I'm not perfect. I may have on my flimsy sweatsuit, and my hair may look like Einstein. But if they say, you got to come deliver right now, I'm going to show up. The message of Mary is to know that the blessings are always here for you. And that you are that blessing, that The Lord has blessed me and is with me. As I say yes, I nurture it and I deliver it every day. We have selected a song that I want to lead you in. Some of you may know it. It's titled, In This Very Room. We're going to sing it and then enter into a time of meditative prayer together. In this very room, there's quite enough love for one like me. And in this very room, there's quite enough joy for one like me. And there's quite enough hope and quite enough power to chase away any gloom. For Spirit, sweet Spirit, is in this very room. Sing it with me if you will. In this very room, there's quite enough love for one like me. And in this very room, there's quite enough joy for one like me. And there's quite